Valkyrie Elysium is here. Square Enix's Valkyrie Profile series holds a special place in the hearts of its fans, and the latest entry has been anticipated for quite some time. However, it has also caught the attention of JRPG fans all over the world, even if they've never played any of the previous games in the series. I'm one of them. I've been playing the game for the past 4 days, racking up about 15 hours so far, and now I'm here to give you my spoiler-free thoughts and hopefully answer questions that you might have. I'll be going over my big four, the most important factors that I use to judge all of the games that I play. Those are gameplay and combat, world and level design, story and characters, and UI and accessibility. I don't want to keep you waiting, so let's go ahead and dive in. The overall gameplay loop in Valkyrie Elysium is pretty simple. After completing the tutorial, you start off in Valhalla, which serves as a quest hub and a gathering place for your allies. When you're ready, you approach the Astral Globe, select a mission to embark on, and you are teleported to an area of Midgard. Once you've arrived in that area, you will have access to a decent-sized map to explore, fight enemies, and hunt for loot. You'll also occasionally find spirits who will give you access to side quests, and those can be started later. Occasionally, you'll come across points where you can save and upgrade your weapons using resources that you loot from enemies and find around the map. You can also level up Valkyrie's skills using these same resources. After following the quest markers and completing the quest, you will be sent back to Valhalla, where the loop starts anew. Now, as far as gameplay outside of combat, there's really not a whole lot to talk about. You'll be running around and exploring the map, hunting for loot and resources, finding hollow blossoms, which I'll touch on later, and solving some very simple puzzles, if you can even call them puzzles. Pretty basic stuff. Where the gameplay shines is undoubtedly the combat. Combat in Valkyrie Elysium is fluid, flashy, and satisfying, especially when you're doing well and you get into your flow. There are several weapons you can unlock, which each have their own unique fighting styles and combos. And the parry and perfect dodge mechanics are incredibly rewarding if you can pull them off. You also have access to a tool called the Soul Chain, which will latch onto your enemies and pull you to them. It's a lot of fun to use. On top of that, you have Divine Arts, which are basically the spells in this game. With them, you can heal yourself, cast fireballs, call down lightning storms, and my personal favorite, a gravity spell that pulls and lumps up your enemies, which sets them up for devastating AoE attacks. Now, where it gets really interesting is the Einherjar system. Einherjar are powerful human souls who have pledged themselves to your cause. You can summon up to 2 of them at a time, and they will wreak havoc on the battlefield using their spells and fighting abilities against your enemies for a short while. The combat system in this game gets a lot of stuff right, and it's incredibly fun. However, it's not without its issues. Let's touch on those for a bit. The lock-on system is possibly my biggest complaint in regards to the combat. When you are locked onto an enemy, you lose control of the camera. Instead of controlling the camera, your right stick's only functionality is to change your lock-on target. This means that your camera will be left to the whims of whatever system they put in place that tracks your target. And pretty frequently, you will find yourself getting frustrated at the camera angles and not being able to see the rest of the battlefield. It can be pretty rough at times. Another problem lies in the fact that you cannot cancel out of your attacks. Once your attack animation starts, you are committed to seeing it through. Now, this wouldn't inherently be a bad thing if it wasn't for the fact that some attacks and combos have animations that go on for ages. Not being able to cancel out of them means you're almost never safe if there are multiple enemies on the battlefield. And on top of that, some attacks and combos just don't seem to track well, even when you're locked on. This is especially true for aerial combos. There have been several times where I've started an aerial combo, the first attack or two lands, but then I completely whiff and I go flying off the edge of a stage. When stuff like that happens, it can easily take you out of your flow, and it'll turn a fight that you might have been having fun with into one that's not so enjoyable. So that's why combat in this game is in kind of a weird place for me. Because when it's fun and things are working correctly, it is so much fun. It is such a good time. But then there are other times where, whether it's because of the camera spazzing out or because you dropped out of a combo that you shouldn't have, it's just really frustrating. The combat system in this game could have really been something special. It could have been amazing. But due to these issues, it just falls flat sometimes. And it's always frustrating when you play a game that's fun, but you see the potential for what it could have been, but it doesn't quite live up to it. And that's what I'm seeing with Valkyrie Elysium. Anyways, I've rambled on long enough about this topic. Gameplay and combat, I'll give Valkyrie Elysium a B. It could have easily been an A if they had polished some of these systems a little bit more, but it is what it is. It's not bad, it's not great. Let's move on. Much like the combat, there's a lot to appreciate when it comes to the world and level design in Valkyrie Elysium. As you progress through the story, you'll travel to several unique zones, which are very pleasant to look at, and each of these zones has their own unique biomes and architecture. In this world, I feel like both the art style and muted color palette really lend themselves to the artistic vision for this game, as does the extraordinary soundtrack. The world and music was giving me strong Nier Automata vibes at times, and that's definitely a win in my book. When you're first introduced to a zone through the main quest, you'll typically start at one end of the map, and you'll need to follow quest markers and complete objectives as you make your way across to the other side. These main quests, as you might expect, usually culminate in a boss fight, or sometimes even an entire dungeon for you to battle through. It may not be the most innovative design, but it's a tried and true formula used in many RPG and action-adventure games that we've seen before. Each zone sports a decent-sized map with various opportunities to go off the beaten path, whether you're searching for loot or just exploring for the sake of exploring. If you look around, you may even find wayward spirits and characters that you can speak with to gain some insight into the lore. Some of them may even offer a side quest that you can complete later for a nice reward. As you make your way through each zone, you'll also come across these little blue flowers that are called hollow blossoms. When you interact with these flowers, you gain a glimpse into someone's memories from the past and learn more about them. It's a really nice touch that I feel like anyone who's interested in the lore can appreciate. And some of the stories that I've read through these have been absolutely gut-wrenching. You can't deny that this game's world has an atmosphere, and it gets a lot of stuff right. But unfortunately, like the combat, Valkyrie Elysium's level design has some areas where it isn't quite up to par. I noticed that as pretty as the maps look on the surface, oftentimes they feel kind of empty when you really dive into them. It just doesn't seem like enough love was given to the fine details. There were times where I could tell that certain assets and ideas had been reused, and arguably abused, to the point where I actually had to check my map just to be certain that I hadn't already been to a certain location. Each zone is also plagued by invisible walls and dead ends, that just seem kind of lazy, to be honest. There have been so many times where I thought I could enter a new area by jumping over a fence or cutting through an alley, just to find an invisible wall in my way. And I know that this sort of stuff is commonplace in these sorts of games, but in this game it's done to the point where it almost seems like they're taunting or trolling you with them. Between these deceiving level boundaries, the relative emptiness of the world, the lack of fine details, and the excess of reused assets, it leaves kind of a sour taste in my mouth. If I were to grade the world and level design based on my experience so far, I would probably give it a solid B. There's enough that they got right for me to appreciate the different zones and want to explore them, but I can't help but feel like there were missed opportunities, and I wonder just how incredible these maps could have been with a little more work and polish put into them. Possibly the strongest aspect of Valkyrie Elysium are its story and its characters. Now, I myself never played the Valkyrie profile games, but I can safely say that this game has its own self-contained story. As I mentioned earlier, I want this video to be spoiler-free, so I won't go into details on plot points or the ambitions of certain characters. All I'll say is that the folks who wrote this story, they know what they're doing. It progresses in a way that feels very natural, even if it is a bit of a slow burn at first. As is explained at the very beginning of the game, you play as a Valkyrie, who has been created by Odin, and whose sole mission is to purify souls on Midgard, in order to help Odin save the world. There are several well-executed twists and turns, some of which you may see coming if you're familiar with Norse mythology. Along the way, you'll meet the souls of powerful humans who have died, and they will become allies in your journey, pledging themselves to your service. These characters, Yor and Heriar, are well developed, and they go through convincing arcs of their own. There really aren't too many negatives that I can put forward here. If anything, I suppose I simply question why everybody in the game has a British accent in the English dub, as opposed to being Scandinavian. And also, to be completely honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Odin's voice acting, but those really are my only complaints. I haven't finished the game yet, so these opinions could certainly change depending on how the rest of the story develops, but I would have to give it an A based on my experience so far. Valkyrie Elysium's UI is clean and well crafted. The HUD shows you what you need to know, presents it in an aesthetically pleasing package, and doesn't crowd the screen or overwhelm you. You can see your health bar, soul gauge, and arts gauge below your character. In the bottom left, you have your quick access weapons and items. In the bottom right, you have pop-out menus for your Enheriar and your Divine Arts. And then in the top right, you can see your current quest objective. These are the only HUD elements that are persistent throughout the entire game. Jumping over to the menus, you can see several categories at the top. Starting with items, we have several subcategories underneath it to navigate for consumables, weapons, runes, upgrade materials, scrolls, and key items. Moving over to the Equip menu, this is obviously where you decide what quick access weapons and items you have equipped, as well as your Enheriar and Divine Arts. In the Valkyrie menu, this is where you upgrade and assign skills for, you guessed it, your Valkyrie. The skill trees aren't massive, but there is a lot of fun stuff inside each of them. You have one skill tree for attack, one for defense, and one for support. You'll be able to acquire every skill in the game. The catch is you can only have so many skills active at one time, meaning that at a certain point, you're going to have to pick and choose what you want to keep and make a build for your Valkyrie. Further down here in the Valkyrie menu, you can also set auto summons, which are conditions where your Einherjar are summoned automatically during combat. These can be extremely useful, but keep in mind that Einherjar summoned this way will still use some of your soul gauge. Over in the Einherjar menu, you can customize your Einherjar companions. There are multiple attacks and abilities to unlock for each of them, and you can also adjust their summon duration. A lower duration takes up less of your soul gauge, and a longer duration will take up more. Moving on to the collection menu, you can read up on information and lore you've discovered in your travels surrounding your Einherjar, important characters, enemies, and hollow blossoms. And you can also review common terminology used throughout the game, as well as tutorials. The options menu is pretty basic, so I won't go into much detail here. Just know that you can adjust most of the game mechanics you would typically expect, like auto assist, lock-on behavior, and camera speed. You can also view the controls and cycle between various controller presets. The brightness and audio settings should be pretty self-explanatory. All of these menus are presented in a clean-cut way that are easy to understand and navigate. But now, let's get to the bad. And I only have 2 points to talk about here, but they're kind of a big deal. First of all, there are basically no accessibility options, not a single one. So if you're a gamer who needs options like colorblind filters, menu narration, enhanced contrast, on-screen visualizers, or any other form of accessibility features, well, you're just out of luck. And that's really unfortunate and disappointing to say about a high-budget title in 2022. Furthermore, none of the controller presets are all that great, and unfortunately, you can't even customize the button mapping. So you'll have to force yourself to learn the mediocre controller setups that they give you. Again, this is 2022. This sort of thing should be standard for high-budget games at this point. So while the HUD and the UI look great and they're easy to use, hopefully you can see why those 2 features being gone is such a big deal. Now, if you don't need accessibility features and you don't mind the presets, I guess this isn't really much of a negative for you, but those options should really be in the game regardless. Now, as far as grading this category, the UI in itself I would give an A, but controls are a B-, and accessibility features is an F, because they are completely absent. So overall, this category gets a C+. Valkyrie Elysium is a fantastic game in some areas, and a bit of a letdown in others. There's a big part of me that's left asking, what if? What if the combat and camera issues were addressed? What if the world was a little more enticing and interesting to explore? What if the game actually supported accessibility features and customizable controls? Well, if all of those issues had been addressed, I think we could have been looking at a truly amazing game here. But instead, we're left with a good game that has a handful of issues. Now, I still enjoy playing this game, and I plan on finishing it. The combat still feels great when it's working. The world is interesting enough most of the time. The story and characters are fantastic. Overall, the devs got enough right to make this game worth my time and attention. I can look past the negatives and appreciate the positives. But I also can't say that I'm 100% satisfied with it. At the end of the day, I would probably give this game a B. Its highest points are A tier, and then its lowest points are C tier. So I think that B is a nice home for it. Anyways, that's gonna wrap up this Thoughts video today. If you were on the fence about buying this game, I hope that my video has helped you in some way. And if it has, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. I plan on making more content like this in the future for a wide variety of games. And also, for anyone who has played the game already, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree with me? Disagree? Did I not cover a topic you were hoping I would? Let me know in the comments below. But thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.